Amnesty International Saudi Arabia among the top executioners in the world. In its annual report released on April 8, 2025, Amnesty International revealed that Saudi Arabia was among the top countries in the world for carrying out executions in 2024. The organization accused Saudi authorities of using the death penalty as a tool to silence political dissent. According to the report, Saudi authorities carried out at least 345 executions within a single year, the highest number recorded by Amnesty since it began monitoring executions in the kingdom. The report stressed that the vast majority of executions in Saudi Arabia followed trials that lacked the minimum standards of fairness, relying heavily on confessions extracted under torture, with verdicts issued behind closed doors, away from public scrutiny and human rights monitoring. This escalation in the use of the death penalty comes despite repeated promises by Saudi authorities to limit its use, exposing the falsehood of official claims regarding legal and human rights reforms. The following contribution was prepared by the German news program Tagesschau translates to Review of the Day in English on April 8, 2025. It's a national and international news service that airs on the public television network ARD. An execution almost every day in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia wants to be perceived as cosmopolitan and increase its international influence. But a report by Amnesty International shows that the number of executions there has nearly doubled. I've landed in unexplored areas, seen things you wouldn't believe. The Saudi Tourism Authority advertises its visitors with hauntingly beautiful images of natural wonders and archaeological sites in the kingdom. The country has opened up to tourists and hosts political negotiations, film festivals, and international sporting events. For Julia Ducro, this is a smokescreen. The Secretary General of the German section of Amnesty International says, "The image Saudi Arabia presents itself to us does not reflect reality." Ducro argues with numbers. In 2024, 345 people were executed in Saudi Arabia, almost one every day, and twice as many as in 2023. Never before has the human rights organization Amnesty documented such a high number of death sentences carried out in Saudi Arabia in its annual report on the death penalty. A false promise. This negative record also outrages Taha al-Haji. The Saudi human rights lawyer lives in Berlin and has been criticizing the execution practices in his home country for years. These figures are historic and unprecedented. They contradict the promises made by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He had announced that he would limit executions to murder cases, but the figures expose these promises as false. Vague accusations, unfair trials. According to Amnesty International, around 40% of those executed were sentenced to death for drug offenses. The exact charges are often unclear, and the trials are unfair. Confessions extracted through torture are being used. These are incommunicado detentions, with no access to family or lawyers in pretrial detention. In this respect, these are decisions and sentences made on grossly unfair grounds, presumably based on drug offenses. Further death sentences would affect terrorists or those who are considered to be such in Saudi Arabia. The judiciary here acts very arbitrarily, criticizes lawyer al-Haji. Some of these charges are political, for participating in demonstrations, high treason, and incitement of public opinion. In addition, death sentences have been imposed on individuals based on their political views or social media comments. More death sentences, especially in the Middle East. In its annual report on the death penalty, Amnesty International writes that last year saw more executions worldwide than in 2015. Countries in the Middle East were primarily responsible for the increase, in addition to Saudi Arabia, Iran and Iraq in particular. However, more people were also executed in Yemen and Egypt in 2024 than in the previous year. The Human Rights Organization also sees a positive trend worldwide. Only 15 countries in total still carry out the death penalty. Amnesty calls it an isolated minority. Criticism often goes unheard. However, recent years and months have shown that Saudi Arabia is anything but isolated globally, despite its poor human rights record. Julia Ducro also indirectly acknowledges this when she says, "When it comes to Saudi Arabia, our criticism often falls flat. This must change. The new German government must also address human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. And it must definitely be addressed that the death penalty should be outlawed and that these incredibly high rates in Saudi Arabia must stop. However, there are no signs so far that the numbers are declining. In Saudi Arabia, not only were more people executed in 2024 than the previous year, but more people were also sentenced to death.